On this episode of the Layover Live, Grant stops by to talk the power of podcasting. Hey Grant, where's the video? We're talking about podcasting. We're not actually podcasting.
Oh, okay. How about this?
Nice. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 65 of the Layover Live, where we bring you the top article from the Layover each week. I'm Jason Swick, VP of Digital Marketing, joined by my right-hand Layover guy, Grant Stoltz, strategic analyst at SimpleView. You like that?
I do, right-hand Layover guy. I'll take it. I will take it.
Hey, in my case, because I'm right-handed, the right hand's better than the left.
That's fair.
Okay, so good stuff. So we're talking about podcasting today, right? And I think it's a really, really good medium. The article comes out of Marketing Land, talks about the growth in podcasting. So I think it's a really good thing to start to talk about, because as we think about marketing and we talk about being destination marketers, we don't really talk about podcasting. We consume the content today. I was just talking to actually Katie Cook in Austin, and we were talking about who's the biggest consumer of podcasting, right? Because she listens to a lot of podcasts. I listen to podcasts pretty much every day on my way into work. But as destination marketers, we don't think about that as a good marketing tool. And even showing some stats, as you and I were doing some research for this Layover Live, and we were talking about how we wanted to approach this, looking at some of the stats, it looks like travel just in general is a pretty underserved vertical. So there's definitely room for growth here. So I want to talk about this, but first and foremost, let's talk about the growth in podcasting. You know, we got to like 60 million or 62 million people listen on a weekly basis, which is insane. So how do we even get to that point, Grant, in the first place?
No, for sure. I mean, it's a massive number of people.
I mean, it really is.
That's just, it's astounding in that sense. But really, I mean, podcasts as we know it really came about in 2004 with the advent of iTunes and iTunes podcasts. Previous to that, you know, people still had subscription-based audio platforms. They're known more as audio blogs or something.
Yeah, and those go back into like the 80s.
Exactly, exactly. So really, you know, podcasts as we know in the modern sense came around about 2004, and then really kind of took off from there. You know, a lot of people had their own audio podcast, kind of evolved into video podcasts as well, and then kind of around the late 2000s, kind of had a little bit of a slump. You know, it was, a lot of people had some good viewership or listenership as it was, but not a lot of buzz or activity around that. But only really in the last, I want to say, 5 years or so, we've seen a big resurgence in audio. You know, call it the on-demand generation or what have you, that people want their content now, whether it's a piece of radio content or a piece of, you know, content that's been part of another TV show or radio show, what have you.
Absolutely.
It's on demand right now.
No, and it makes a lot of sense. And also for the way that we're consuming that content, which you alluded to also, the fact that voice assistants are now becoming a part of our daily lives is another medium that works really, really well as it relates to podcasts. So it's another way to distribute that content. So I agree with you. I think we're seeing this huge resurgence on that side of the fence. But if we're thinking about destination marketers and how it benefits our audience out there, what are some ways that they can leverage this right now to get the most out of podcasting?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two ways to think about it. One is the content creation route, and one is the advertising route. You know, the one that I think is has the most white space, like you mentioned, is the creation route of making some sort of podcast in your vertical, in your space. Like you said, travel, there's not a lot of things that are being published in the podcast world. You know, something that might be interesting is, you know, making your own podcast. Start putting your content out there. What are you as a DMO seeing in your destination? What stories can you tell about your city that might be interesting to someone? Or again, someone maybe planning a trip might want a little more insight into that. Might be kind of long and tedious on a blog post, but something that they could listen on their way into work or on the way to the airport. That might be something a little more interesting than just, you know, again, a written guide or something like that. Might be a little more engaging in that sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And again, circling back even with voice assistants again, finding a way that as DMOs we can start to market by telling these stories through those voice assistants. That's a really good way to be able to do that. Now, you talked about creating your own podcast, right? And at first it sounds like really, really overwhelming. It seems like a lot of work. So if someone out there wanted to create one today, what's a good way for them to go about doing that, Grant?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is figuring out what story you want to tell. Whether it's about your destination in general, the history, about certain attractions. I always think some really interesting things are the people in your destination. You know, our partners that you work with, the local businesses, artisans, people who have lived there for 70, 80 years. What stories do they have to tell? You know, there's always some gold mines, I think, that you can find of just regular old average Joes who may not be so average who are in your city or your
so starting with the storytelling first is a good way to approach it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then, from there, to kind of get maybe a little tactical, I think a really easy way is record on your iPhone. An iPhone is an amazing near-field recorder. Just hold it, a few inches from your face, and you can pick up some great audio from there. You have a guest on as well. Maybe ask them to bring their iPhone. You actually have now 2 channels of audio you can mix together, and that takes a really easy piece of software like GarageBand or Audacity if you're a Windows user as well. And being able to just mash those 2 together and then export them in an MP3 file, and you're kind of on your way to having a podcast. From there,
for a way to distribute it then. So
yeah,
that's the next step, right?
That is the last step. Okay. Is using a tool that we actually use internally is Anchor. Anchor is a great free tool that you can use to create a platform to distribute your content to. You can actually send it to virtually every single podcast medium out there, iTunes, Spotify, some of the other ones like PodRocket or some of the other ones.
Yeah.
So other mediums that you can just simply one hit and it blasts it out everywhere. So now you have your great story with great audio easily in a one-stop shop just to blast content out. And from there, you can actually start repurposing that content. I always think it's much easier to repurpose a piece of audio content into maybe now a blog post or an Instagram snippet or something that can also tease out that piece of content rather than the other way around.
No,
so
that's
a great content generation tool.
Yeah, Grant, that's all really, really good advice. And I think the barriers to entry that people really think today are smaller than they've ever been, right?
Totally.
To get into it. I mean, again, with Anchor for distribution, which is free, distributing out even on Spotify, who owns Anchor. So that's another way to be able to do it. Just finding those niches. We all have those stories to tell in our destinations. So I think there's enough content that's out there, starting with the audio and then repurposing a lot of that content that then feeds into your social media, then feeds into your other pieces that are out there. I think it's a really, really, really good strategy. So thanks for sharing that today.
Of course.
Speaking of podcasting,
yes.
right? Hey, no coincidence, but we're also now bringing the Layover live on Spotify podcast as well as iTunes podcast. So in addition to us wanting you to subscribe to this channel as well, we would love for all of you to subscribe to us on Spotify and or on iTunes podcast to get those versions to you delivered through audio. We would love that, and we really appreciate you tuning in each and every week. Thank you all for your time. Grant, thanks for your time.
Of course.
We'll see you next time, folks. Have a great day.